There was in Jerusalem a prince whose appearance dazzled multitudes. He walked through the streets as if heaven itself had poured its glory upon him. It was Absalom, son of King David. His hair, thick and gleaming, swayed like a living crown. His smile attracted gazes, and his posture, majestic, made the people whisper, "This is the chosen one." Behind this glory, however, something dark was hidden, a sleeping pride, an unhealed wound, a desire that grew in silence, the longing for power. These seeds, planted in the heart of David's son, germinated day after day. But how would a young man with so much potential, loved by the people, become the symbol of Israel's most bitter rebellion? Would the throne only be marked by blood, or also by omissions, silences, and broken choices? This is not just a story from the past. It is a living warning for parents, children, leaders, and all who face the weight of pride and absence. Before proceeding, subscribe to the channel Knowing the Word. Here we reveal the depths of the Bible as you have never seen. Activate the bell and walk with us on this revealing journey. Let us now discover the hidden details of Absalom's life, a story of splendor, silence, pain, and irreversible consequences. The first rays of sun caressed the walls of Jerusalem, drawing long shadows over the royal palace. It was a time of apparent peace, but the ancient stones whispered secrets of past wars and conflicts that were still germinating in the womb of the future. In the corridors adorned with olive trees and fine tapestries, a name was whispered with respect: Absalom, the king's son, the enchanting heir. His future shone like newly polished gold. Born of Maacah, princess of Geshur, Absalom united in his blood two royal lineages, David's strength and the foreign nobility of Talmai, king of Geshur. From childhood, Absalom was noticed. His thick hair, intense eyes, and skin bronzed like the sunset attracted gazes wherever he passed. Servants bowed, women admired him in silence, and even veteran soldiers exchanged looks of respect. It was as if royalty had molded him from the womb. But what fascinated also fed him: pride. And this pride, silent and well-tended, grew with each compliment, each look of admiration, each feast where his name was exalted as a future promise of glory. David, even being a wise and feared king, did not perceive what was sprouting in his son's heart. The king's eyes were turned to the borders, alliances, and wars, but not to Absalom's heart. The father's silence opened space for vanity to grow. Without limits, Maacah, the mother, carried within herself the nobility of Geshur and the weight of being foreign. In Absalom, she saw not just a son, but a living alliance between kingdoms. She enveloped him in ancient words, blessings from her people, forgotten rituals and prayers in another language, an identity that was more than Israelite. Absalom grew between two worlds, two cultures, two expectations, and this fed his uniqueness and his ambition. Each year, his fame increased. At the prince's feasts, he was the center of attention. Young men imitated him, women admired him, elders murmured, "This one will be greater than his father." And Absalom believed, "I will be greater." His hair, symbol of his glory, was cut annually and weighed as if it were a trophy. Each strand seemed to carry a promise, each lock a silent declaration of power, but there was something the eyes did not see. An unshakable self-confidence was growing inside Absalom, ardent, intense, irreversible, and a question began to arise within him like a whisper in the palace nights. Why wait? Why not now? In the stone corridors, while the echoes of conversations disguised hidden tensions, revolt was germinating. Absalom's glory was transforming into armor, and also into a trap. That morning, the wind blew, carrying a strange silence, a silence that foretold pain. Tamar, David's daughter, Absalom's sister, walked through the palace corridors with grace and serenity. Her gaze was sweet, her walk gentle. She did not know that day would mark the end of her innocence. Amnon, David's firstborn, burned with sick desire for his half-sister. What was obsession grew in silence, like poison. With help from the cunning Jonadab, he devised a trap. He pretended to be sick and asked that Tamar prepare food for him. Tamar, innocent, entered the room with cakes made with care. The aroma was pleasant, but the environment became heavy and oppressive. When she leaned to serve him, Amnon grabbed her hand with force. She screamed. She pleaded, "No, my brother, do not do this. Such a thing is not done in Israel." But the words were ignored. He violated her. He tore her garments and destroyed her dignity. Then, full of contempt, he expelled her. Tamar left the room in tears, with torn clothes, ash on her head, the living image of a wounded soul. Absalom, upon seeing her, understood everything, and even taken by fury, he said only, "Be silent, my sister. He is your brother." But that silence was not omission. It was strategy. It was the silence of a lion waiting for the right moment to attack. David became furious upon learning of what happened, but did nothing. No justice, no comfort, only silence. A silence that fed Absalom's anger like fuel on hidden fire. Tamar, dishonored, lived isolated in her brother's house, and Absalom, day after day, observed his sister's pain, his father's cowardice, and Amnon's unpunished laughter. Revenge would not be quick, but it would be certain. 2 years passed since Tamar's dishonor. For many, time had covered the tragedy like dust covers ruins. But for Absalom, time only matured revenge, like wine aged in dark barrels. Amnon's blood was still being demanded in his heart. The time of sheep shearing arrived, a festive celebration on Absalom's lands in Baal Hazor. It was the perfect moment. The princes would be gathered, wine would flow, laughter would be loose. Absalom sent an invitation to the king. "I pray you, my father, come with your servants to the feast." But David refused. Perhaps from fatigue, perhaps from discernment, perhaps from divine providence. Absalom insisted, "Allow then that Amnon come." David, without suspecting, consented. Everything was ready. In secret, Absalom called his trusted men and gave them the fatal order. "When Amnon's heart is merry with wine, and I say, 'Strike Amnon,' then kill him." It was not advice. It was a sentence sealed with pain. The feast began like any other. Tents pitched, meat roasting, music echoing, wine pouring into golden cups. Absalom smiled, but his eyes were fixed on a single target. When the environment reached the climax of celebration, Absalom leaned discreetly toward his men. A simple gesture, a silent command. The servants moved like shadows. The blade gleamed under the firelight, and in an instant, Amnon fell dead among songs, cups, and interrupted laughter. Amnon's scream mixed with the sound of harps. Blood stained the festive clothes and royal carpets. The banquet transformed into a scene of terror. The other princes panicked. They fled in desperation, knocking over tables, horses in stampede. Many thought all would be killed. But Absalom remained for a moment, motionless, observing. Tamar was avenged, Amnon punished, and he exiled. There was no longer a place for him in Jerusalem. He fled to Geshur, the land of his grandfather Talmai, and silence descended upon David's palace, a heavy silence like that of a house where blood is still fresh, but tears have not yet been wept. David, upon receiving the news, tore his garments and fell into weeping. The king, the father, the man, all his roles crumbled in that moment, one son dead, another fugitive, a kingdom divided by unpunished crimes. Thus began Absalom's journey toward exile, not as a common fugitive, but as a prince broken inside, shaped by pain, and now willing to wait for the right moment to return. and claim. The dust from the road stuck to Absalom's eyes as he rode away from everything he knew. He left behind the palace where he had grown up, the corridors that once echoed with his voice, and the presence of a father who now became only memory. In Geshur he found shelter, but not peace. The people received him with honors. The tables were abundant, the halls majestic, but in his chest everything was bitterness. Honor had been stained, the name lost, the throne distant. Ma'akah, his mother, tried to console him, but her words no longer touched her son's heart. He walked among Geshur's gardens like a royal shadow, breathing but not living. He looked at the sunset and saw only Tamar's face, and David's silence, a silence more cruel than any punishment. During feasts, Absalom smiled, but his heart sharpened swords. The people saw him as a sleeping lion, and indeed he was one. For Absalom was not made for exile. He was a tensioned arrow, and the target was clear. The sun burned over Jerusalem's gates when Absalom crossed its thresholds again. The city's stones seemed older, the gazes more contained. Although the prince returned, nothing was as before. David had consented to his return after Joab's intercession, but imposed a cruel sentence disguised as mercy. "Return to your house, but you shall not see my face." And so Absalom walked through the streets that once celebrated him, now as a ghost, free but not welcomed, an exile within his own city. He entered his residence. Servants received him with respect, but there was hesitation in each gesture. The air was heavy, eyes avoided contact. The king's palace was near, but unreachable. 2 years passed thus, 2 long years of waiting, days that dragged like chains, nights that weighed like stone on the chest. Absalom knew the people still looked at him with reverence. His thick hair, his haughty posture, his royal presence, everything in him proclaimed royalty. But the shadow of rejection was greater than any appearance. He saw David's absence not just as coldness, but as affront. Each silence from the father was like a blade slowly driven in, a contempt that screamed. Maacah, his mother, sometimes visited him. She spoke of ancient days, of Geshur's hills, of childhood full of promises, but Absalom listened without responding. His eyes were turned toward the palace, the throne, the reconciliation that never came. In the 2nd year, tired of waiting, he tried to call Joab twice, but was ignored. Patience ended. "Go and set fire to Joab's field," he ordered. And so the field burned. Smoke rose like a warning. Joab, furious, came in person. Absalom faced him firmly and said, "I called you, so you would take me to the king. If there is guilt in me, let him kill me. But I can no longer live without seeing my father's face." The words cut the air. Joab, defeated, took the message to the king. David finally yielded. Absalom was called to the palace. He entered with reverence. The king was on the throne, empty eyes, no tears, no emotion. Absalom prostrated himself. The king kissed him, a soulless gesture, a political greeting, but the abyss between the two remained untouched. In that cold kiss, Absalom understood. He was no longer a son. He was a threat, a problem to be managed. And it was there, in that instant, that the last seed of rebellion sprouted with force. The prince who had returned now had a new purpose. The first lights of morning had not even touched the ground when Absalom already positioned himself at the city gates. Dressed in majestic garments, mounted in a chariot, followed by 50 men, he was a living vision of what the people imagined an ideal king to be. There, before the multitude seeking justice, he planted the seeds of his ascension. When someone approached with a cause, he extended his hand, embraced the stranger and said, "Your cause is just, but there is no one to hear you on the king's behalf." It was a subtle lie, a calculated insinuation, sweet poison. He continued, "Oh, if I were judge in the land, all would come to me, and I would do justice." These words, spoken with firm voice and compassionate eyes, entered hearts like balm. The sea, widows, farmers, the forgotten of the kingdom saw in him a redeemer, a leader, a friend. When someone knelt, Absalom raised him. "No, my brother, do not prostrate yourself. We are equals." This image circulated. The people murmured his name in the squares. "Absalom is different." Others completed, "He understands us." Meanwhile, David remained secluded, aged, disconnected. Without realizing, the throne was being undermined from bottom to top. The people's heart, stolen before his very eyes. Absalom knew what he was doing. It was not just influence. It was power construction. A kingdom without swords, a revolution without fanfare. Jerusalem breathed his name. But the wind that carried the praises also carried the storm. The sun was already setting when Absalom departed for Hebron. His eyes gleamed. His plan complete. The city where David had been anointed king would now be the stage for his own coronation. He summoned 200 men from Jerusalem under the pretext of a feast. All went unknowing, witnesses to a coup. He offered sacrifices. Trumpets sounded, and the voice echoed through the hills. "Absalom reigns in Hebron." In Jerusalem, chaos was established. A messenger ran to David. "The heart of the men of Israel is with Absalom." David, upon hearing, did not hesitate. The pain was visible, the voice tremulous, but decided, "Let us arise and flee. If not, he will overtake us quickly and bring ruin upon us." And the king departed, not as a warrior, but as a wounded man betrayed by his own blood. Absalom wore the mantle of royalty. The people cheered him. But the abyss he had dug was too deep. The kingdom was splitting, and civil war inevitable. Night had descended upon Jerusalem, but in the palace hall taken by force, the air burned like living embers. Absalom, the new king through rebellion, was surrounded by anxious men, generals hungry for quick victories, and counselors thirsty for glory and power. Among them, Ahithophel stood out, a man whose counsel until then was considered as the voice of God. He rose with cutting eyes and sharp voice. "Let me choose 12,000 men, and tonight I will pursue David. I will fall upon him while he is weary and discouraged. He will flee, and I will kill only the king. Then all the people will return to you, as the bride returns to her husband." The proposal was direct, surgical, lethal. The hall silenced. Absalom's eyes glittered. The idea of eliminating David quickly and consolidating himself as king seemed irresistible, but among those present there was another man. Hushai, David's friend, infiltrated among the rebels. He rose with calm voice, but with cunning. "This counsel is not good this time." Absalom's gaze narrowed. "You know your father and the men with him. They are valiant, furious like bears robbed of their cubs. Your father will not spend the night among the people. He is hidden, and if one of us falls at the beginning, panic will take the army. And then, like one who throws bait to a proud fish," he completed, "gather all Israel, and you yourself go at the front of the troop. Thus victory will be yours, and the people will see that you are a true king." Absalom bit the bait. He did not want just to win. He wanted to be exalted, to lead with glory, to be seen as Israel's savior. The voice of pride muffled wisdom, and Hushai's counsel was accepted. Ahithophel, upon realizing, sat in silence, his plan rejected, his wisdom ignored. He knew defeat had begun there. The trumpets echoed, swords gleamed. The forest of Ephraim became the stage of a bloody civil war. Israel fought against itself, brothers against brothers, sons against fathers. Absalom rode at the front line, his majestic appearance cutting through the winds. His long hair swayed like banners in the wind. He was the personification of youth, beauty, and glory. But nature conspired In an instant, thick branches of an oak reached him. His hair, his glory, became entangled in the branches. His body was suspended between heaven and earth. The horse continued. The prince remained trapped, vulnerable, hanging. Like a warning from heaven, a soldier spotted him and ran to Joab, David's general. "I saw Absalom hanging in an oak." Joab, impatient, questioned, "Why did you not kill him? I would have given you silver and honor." But the soldier responded, "Even for 1,000 coins, I would not touch the king's son." Joab said nothing more. He just advanced. He found Absalom, struggling, his face in desperation, perhaps to plead, perhaps to scream. Joab pulled 3 darts and drove them into the prince's heart, one after another, without hesitation. Blood flowed, the body trembled. Then his men surrounded him and completed the execution. The forest silenced. Absalom's body was thrown into a pit in the woods. Over him, a heap of stones. Without laments, without honor, without prayer, the handsome prince, the enchanting heir, the symbol of Israel, was now dead, not as a hero, but as a traitor. The news ran, fast as an arrow. David waited at the gate. 2 messengers arrived. The first, hesitant. The second, direct. "May the king's enemies be like that young man." David's heart stopped. His son was dead, not by enemy arrows, not in honorable battle, but struck down like an animal, without defense, without judgment. David went up to the chamber over the gate, and there he collapsed. His cry pierced the walls, cutting through the palace like thunder. "My son Absalom! My son Absalom! Would God I had died instead of you!" There was no king in that cry, no general, no hero, only a father shattered by pain. The echo of his lamentation shook Jerusalem's foundations. Soldiers lowered their heads. Women wept in silence. Servants withdrew. David's mourning was too sacred to be interrupted. The battlefield slowly quieted. Dust settled over the bodies, and the leaves of Ephraim's forest swayed in silence. A shallow grave was hastily opened. There was no procession, no praise, no official weeping. Absalom's body was thrown to the ground. Over him, a heap of stones. Without epitaph, without honor, without declared longing, the prince who had enchanted Israel, David's son, the man whose beauty was celebrated by all, now lay forgotten like any traitor. Joab, who had sealed his fate with coldness, watched from afar. His eyes showed no repentance, only the awareness that this needed to be done. And the soldiers, one by one, threw stones like one who sealed the end of a tragedy. Meanwhile, in Jerusalem, Absalom's name disappeared from mouths like a cursed secret. Women who once commented on his beauty now averted their gaze. Men who once revered him now murmured in low and fearful voice. In the palace, David remained in silence, head down, soul crushed. Absalom's name, now forbidden to be spoken aloud, weighed more than any crown. There, under that pile of stones, were not just the bones of a son, but the remains of a cracked kingdom, of an interrupted dream, of a destroyed hope. The stones cried, "Here ends pride, here lies rebellion." But memory is tireless. And in every corner of the palace, in every servant's whisper, in every shadow of the ancient tapestries, his name still hovered. The winds swept Jerusalem's silent streets. The city stood, but something in it had died. David, dressed in mourning, did not celebrate victory. There were no songs, no dances. The throne was there, polished, golden, elevated. But the king's heart had fallen. The people murmured in secret. Some said, "David delivered us from the Philistines. He is our king." But others, with distant gaze, remembered, "But Absalom, he understood us." The city breathed division, and silence was the greatest of screams. In the palace, tapestries hung heavy, corridors were empty of life, and the king just walked without direction, without spirit, without sun. It was Joab who broke the silence like a sword cuts fog. He entered David's room without ceremony, like one who carries a bitter truth. Today you have shamed all your servants who saved your life and the lives of your sons. Arise, go and speak to your people's heart. David heard, breathed deeply, not because he wanted to, but because he needed to. And so he washed his face, dressed himself, sat at the city gate. The people began to return, cautious. Elders surrounded him. The throne was restored, externally. But inside David, an abyss remained. Absalom's name echoed like a memory of a throne that had been threatened, of a son who could have been king, of a love that was not healed, of a pain that was not silenced. In the squares under the fig trees, elders shook their heads. If he had waited, if he had not exalted himself. Women, while preparing bread, murmured, "He was so beautiful. He seemed molded by God." Young men commented among themselves in low voice, "He listened to us. He understood us." And even the soldiers, hardened, could not deny. There was something in Absalom that marked, something in his youth, in his brilliance, in his intensity, that now left an impossible void to fill. The war had ended, but the wound remained open. David heard the echoes, not with his ears, but with his heart, in each gesture of the people, in each silence of the corridors, in each sleepless night, in the dark interior of the palace, where, once laughter and songs echoed, there was now only silence. And in it, Maacah walked like a shadow, without crown, without glory, without sun. The foreign woman's eyes, once haughty, now fixed on emptiness. There were no more banquets, no more dreams, only memories that pierced the soul like hidden blades. For many, Absalom was the traitor. But for Maacah, he was the boy she had rocked in her arms, whom she had fed with hopes, whom she had seen grow between two kingdoms, a prince molded by the lineage of kings. She remembered the nights in Geshur, the starry sky, while she whispered to her son the stories of her land, how she had planted in his heart words of power, that he was born to reign. Now those words crushed her. Sitting on the cold floor, with disheveled garments and hair in disarray, she wept in silence. Servants passed by her, without daring to touch her, without courage to mention the name that was already forbidden. David's sons avoided her. Their eyes asked without words, "Did you know? Did you feed this?" But Maacah did not defend herself. She just remembered. She touched her son's objects. She ran her fingers over the clothes still hanging. She smelled the mantles. She touched the walls. Each piece of that room was a living memory, an altar of pain. For her, Absalom was still the boy with thick hair, the mischievous smile, the gaze that said, "I am destiny." And he was also the bloodied young man, hanging in an oak, silenced by Joab's spear. And she knew. She had not been guilty of the crime, but part of the seed perhaps had been hers. Absalom was dead, but his name continued alive. He was a silent ghost that hovered in the palace halls and in the muffled conversations of the people. Mothers told their daughters, "Beware of pride that grows like hair. It can become your downfall." Soldiers, when passing by the tree where he had been trapped, removed their hats, as if they were before an altar, not of veneration, but of warning. There fell a prince, but there also was born a lesson. David himself in his solitary nights still saw Absalom, not the man, but the boy, the laughter, the steps in the corridors, the flame in his eyes. He wondered, when was it that I lost him? When did I stop seeing him as a son and start seeing him as a threat? And that question never had an answer. The Midrash Tehillim said, Absalom rebelled against his father, but was also a beloved son. His name was cursed and blessed in the same breath. So spoke the people. Some called him traitor, Others saw him as martyr of youth, as reflection of an absent father, of neglected justice, of an untreated wound. And David carried everything. Each murmur, each silence, each gaze that diverted when he entered. Even restored to the throne, even being the king, David knew he was not the same. The kingdom recognized him, but did not revere him as before. There were invisible cracks in the people, and Absalom's name was one of them. In a forgotten valley, where winds whisper and tree branches sway in lament, there is a pile of stones, a solitary pillar. There is no name, no honor, no public lament. There Absalom was buried, the prince who captivated Israel, the son who defied the father, the heir who wanted to be king before his time, before his death. In his vanity, he had ordered a pillar erected to perpetuate his name, a monument in life. But after his fall, all that remained was an improvised tomb. The stones piled over his body were not just earth over flesh. They were symbol. Here ends unbridled ambition. Here lies the brilliance that forgot the fear of God. The people did not forget Absalom. They did not celebrate him. But neither did they erase him. He was a living warning, a memory engraved, not in monuments, but in Israel's soul. Absalom's blood had been spilled, but his mark remained. David's throne continued. The kingdom followed. Wars came and passed. Solomon rose as heir and consolidated Israel with wisdom and power. But the crack left by Absalom was never completely sealed. David's house, though glorious, was never free from internal conflicts. And in each family crisis that arose, in each son who was lost, the people murmured, Absalom. The name became synonymous with rupture between father and son, of potential without direction, of beauty without fear, of glory without submission. David's lineage was not forgotten by God. On the contrary, from it would come the Messiah, the promised king. But even in Jesus, David's descendant, we see the opposite of Absalom, a king who did not seek the throne before his time, but humbled himself unto the cross, an obedient son unto death, a king crowned not with gold, but with thorns. Absalom wanted the throne by force. Jesus conquered it through sacrifice. In ancient commentaries, rabbis discussed with sorrow Absalom's fate. Some affirmed he was lost forever, for having rebelled against God's anointed father. Others, in compassion, cited that David, when lamenting 7 times his name, Absalom, my son, could have interceded for his soul. 7 laments, 7 cries, 7 screams from a father that perhaps opened the way for mercy. The Talmud suggests that Absalom's judgment is not in men's hands, but before God, and that his story remains as warning. Never play with pride, never confuse appearance with purpose, never trade calling for shortcut. Absalom's story is a warning that crosses centuries. For parents, do not neglect your children. Correct with love, but with firmness. Silence can be as deadly as absence. For children, do not allow pride to take the place of obedience. Rebellion that begins as freedom ends as slavery. For leaders, charisma without character is a time bomb. Beauty without fear is a sandcastle. The Bible does not hide the errors of its heroes. It does not camouflage the failures of its families, because God's purpose is not to glorify men, but to reveal his own glory, even in the midst of tragedy. Absalom died hanging between heaven and earth, like someone who belonged to neither, but his story continues alive. Absalom's story is not just about a rebellious prince. It is about what happens when we abandon fear, reject correction, and let ourselves be carried away by the heart's passions. If this video spoke to you, if it touched areas of your past, your family, or your ministry, subscribe now to the channel Knowing the Word. Here, the Bible comes alive like never before. Activate the bell, leave your like, and share with someone who needs to understand the power of obedience and the risk of pride. You just saw Absalom, the prince who defied the king, a tragedy that still speaks to hearts. See you in the next study. May the Lord continue molding you and keeping you. Shalom.